My name is Eliza Moran. I work in investment finance in Boston. A dry job, but at least I thought I had control over my life. Until that morning, when I received a misdirected email from a notary confirming the sale of the house in Portland. The house in my name. The last memory I had of my father. They had sold my house. No call, no message. And worse, they used that money to fund my half-sister's extravagant wedding. A 5-day mountaintop celebration with French wine, a custom-designed gown, and a short note. You weren't using the house anyway. Have you ever felt betrayed by the very people you once tried to protect? If you have, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe because this story is only beginning. Let me tell you what happened when I stopped staying silent. I'm my father's daughter from his first marriage. That fact was never spoken aloud in our family, but it was always there, in the way my stepmother looked at me, in the way she introduced me to others, in the awkward silence whenever someone asked, "Are you and your sister close?" I lived with my father from a young age. My mother passed away early. When Dad remarried Connie, I was 10. She wasn't cruel, at least not in any overt way, but she never truly treated me like her child. We shared a house, ate meals together, had family photos lining the hallway, but I always felt like a long-term guest in my own home. When my half-sister Marcy was born, I was 13. I took care of her as a baby, changing diapers, warming bottles, rocking her to sleep when Connie was too exhausted. I didn't envy her. I just felt separate, like I was always standing outside, looking in on a world that wasn't quite mine. As I got older, I left home for college on a full scholarship. That's when I gradually became the temporary provider, first covering Connie's hospital bills after her thyroid surgery, then Marcy's final year of tuition when Connie said, "We're in a bind right now. She needs your help this once." So I helped. That once, then again, and again. I never asked for reimbursement. I never brought up money during holidays or family gatherings. Every transaction went through anonymous accounts. I told the bank to create a separate entity to separate personal transactions. But the truth was, I didn't want anyone in the family to know that the person holding everything together was me. I used to think that was how I kept the family intact, that if I didn't count, didn't ask, didn't resent, they would eventually realize I was doing what a daughter, a sister, should do. But in truth, I was just providing free financial support to people who never thought they needed to say thank you. I still remember the afternoon after a big storm in Oregon, when the roof had peeled off and the living room walls had water damage. I wired $9,800 so they could fix it before winter. Marcy sent a 2-word text. Got it. My stepmother called and complained about the insurance company, then ended with, "Good thing we still have this house thanks to your father. He always planned ahead." I gave a quiet laugh, didn't reply. Partly because I knew if I said that was my money, I'd be accused of keeping score, partly because I was used to being forgotten. The Portland house was the only thing I kept after my father passed. He left it to me in his will. Not to draw lines between blood and marriage, but because it was the only asset still in his name before he remarried. He said, "If one day you have nothing, you'll still have somewhere to return to." I never stayed there long. After the funeral, I arranged for Connie and Marcy to live in it, rent-free. I continued paying the property taxes, kept up the maintenance, handled all paperwork. From afar, via calls, emails, and bank accounts, I never asked them to sign a lease. I wanted to believe we could have a kind of trust that didn't need conditions. And each time I visited, which was rare because of work, I'd see pictures of Marcy and Connie on the mantle, but mine were gone. Once I hesitated and asked, "Where's my photo, Mom?" Connie waved it off. "Oh, must be moved during cleaning. I'll find it later." Years passed like that, I grew up, made money, got promoted, lived alone in Boston. I didn't speak much, rarely posted online, rarely mentioned personal matters. They rarely called, unless a bill needed urgent payment. And each time I quietly wired the money, I told myself, this is my family. I thought I was building connection through silence and patience, but the truth is, I was buying acceptance, and they had gotten used to living off what I provided without ever considering that maybe I needed to be seen as part of the family too. Until that morning, when I opened the email and saw the subject line, property transfer completed. That's when I realized I never had a family. I had a role, a convenient daughter, remembered when needed and forgotten right after. I couldn't stop thinking about that email. I read it over and over, but I still couldn't accept one thing. My name had been used to sell the house, and I had no idea. That evening, I opened my laptop and logged into the private system where I kept all documents related to the house. Purchase agreements, tax records, scanned signatures. I checked every file. Everything looked normal. Until I found a strange file added less than 2 weeks ago. A power of attorney letter, supposedly giving Connie full rights to sell the property. The signature at the bottom was my name, but I never signed it. I zoomed in, aligned it, compared it to my actual signature from a 2017 document. The strokes were similar, but I could tell. It was a digital copy of an old signature, pasted into a new form. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Betrayed in a methodical, cold, shameless way. I immediately called a notary office listed on the form. The clerk said curtly, "Yes, Ms. Moran." We verified the signature via a fax sent by the seller from the registered email. I asked, "Which email address?" "A Yahoo account, Eliza_mfinance_83. I've never used that address, and I never faxed anything from Boston." I hung up, my hand still on the mouse. My palm was cold with sweat. A new thought hit me. If they used my identity to sell the house, what else had they used it for? I opened my credit monitoring app. Normally, I check it every quarter, but the last time was 4 months ago. I typed in the access code. The screen loaded. Then a red alert appeared. New credit account opened. The American card. Current balance, $71,893. $75,000. Cardholder, Eliza Moran. It felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I opened the spending details. The transactions from the past 3 weeks flashed across the screen. Magnolia Bridal, $9,800. Crystal Pines Lodge, $22,000. Rentals and Lights, $6,400. Bloom and Bella's, Florist, $5,200. Glam by Shay, $1,150. All wedding expenses, Marcy's wedding. My hands were shaking as I closed the laptop. No, I needed someone who understood this better than I did. I dialed Darian's number. We were college classmates. After graduation, he joined the Financial Fraud Investigation Division in New York. I went into investment strategy. We rarely met, but there was always a kind of unspoken trust between us. We never needed to explain much. He picked up after 3 rings. "Eliza? Wow, it's been a while. Calling this late. Must be serious." I took a breath. I think my identity was stolen. His voice shifted instantly. "Tell me everything. What happened?" I gave this short version. The house was sold, the power of attorney was forged, my signature copied, a new credit card opened under my name, with nearly $72,000 spent on a wedding. And now I waited. Darian went quiet for a few seconds. Then he spoke slowly. "Eliza, this isn't a family issue anymore. This is federal crime. You've been a victim of identity theft, financial abuse, and your credit score could be seriously damaged." "I know. I don't know where to start." "Start by freezing all your credit files immediately." I'll send you secure links to do that with the 3 major bureaus. Then send me everything. Property records, credit card transactions, emails, every single document. Do you think we can do anything about this? It's not about can. I will help you gather enough evidence to prove you've been wronged, and to stop them before they do anything worse. But Eliza, you need to be ready. If your family did this, there could be criminal charges. They could go to prison. I gripped the phone. They crossed a line, Darian. I can't pretend anymore. On the other end, his voice was steady. Then it's time to stop being silent. I never wanted to turn a family event into a battleground. But that afternoon, as I stepped into the Langford Hotel ballroom, I knew there was no turning back. It was Marcy's bridal preview. A small but lavish gathering with French wine, a seasonal tasting menu, and about 80 guests, most of them college friends and relatives from my stepmother's side. They stood in clusters, laughing under soft yellow lights, like nothing in the world mattered more than veil length. I showed up unannounced, not to make a scene, but to confront. I had printed all the documents, the original property file, statements from the newly opened credit card, scans of the forged signature, everything neatly placed in a file envelope pressed under my arm. My stepmother Connie spotted me first. She stood by the wine bar in a pale blue embroidered dress, holding a sparkling martini. Her smile disappeared the moment our eyes met. Eliza, what are you doing here? I walked straight up. We need to talk. Privately. Now. She set her glass down, frowning. This is Marcy's event. You shouldn't be here if you're planning to cause trouble. That house was legally in my name, and someone in this family forged my signature to sell it. If you think I'll stay quiet, you've misjudged me. Connie clutched her purse, glancing nervously around. Lower your voice. You want to humiliate everyone in the middle of this party? I didn't get to respond. A sharp voice rang out behind me. Oh, so you did come. I thought you were too busy saving the world from Boston. I turned. Marcy walked toward me in a champagne silk dress, her hair in a perfect bun, makeup flawless. But her eyes were full of thorns. You already know, I said, trying to stay calm. You used my name to open a credit card, and this entire wedding is debt in my name. She laughed. What nonsense are you talking about? Mom handled the payments, not me. But Mom isn't Eliza Moran. She had no right to sign over the house. And you had no right to spend money from an account in someone else's name. A few guests started turning to look. Some conversation stopped. The air in the room thickened. Connie stepped forward, whispering, Eliza, this isn't the time. Not the time for what, Mom? For when the only thing Dad ever left me was sold without my consent? For when my name was used to rack up over $70,000 in wedding expenses and chandeliers? Marcy clenched her jaw, but her voice was sweet poison. You know what you sound like? A bitter single woman no one loves, no one picked, no one even invited. So you're making up drama to reclaim a little power. I felt every muscle in my body tense, but before I could speak, Marcy raised her hand and slapped me across the face. Right there in the middle of the ballroom. You're jealous no one loves you, she shouted. The room fell silent. People froze. A few wine glasses trembled in guests' hands. I touched my cheek, the skin burning. But it wasn't the pain. It was the humiliation. Connie rushed over and pulled Marcy back, but not before throwing me a cold, slicing glare. You shouldn't have come here, Eliza. This is your sister's special day. You're dragging us all through the mud, over a house. I looked around. At the relatives who'd once accepted holiday money from me, who'd eaten meals in that house, who used to say I was Roger's strong-willed daughter. Not one of them spoke. I understand. Then I turned and walked away. No tears, no rush. I only knew one thing, everything in the envelope under my arm. That was all I had left from what used to be called family. 3 days after Marcy's slap and the crowd's cold silence, I sat in Dorian's office on the 19th floor of a red brick building in Manhattan, watching him print documents thick as my wrist. Here's everything: the full property file, credit card statements, scans of both real and forged signatures, and a digital forensics report proving the IP address that sent the power of attorney doesn't match yours, Darian said, as he clipped each stack with a binder clip. Filed a civil lawsuit with the Multnomah County Court in Oregon this morning, and this is your copy. Can the judge freeze their accounts? I asked. He already has. Darian placed a temporary court order on the table. I read the first line: temporary freeze of all bank accounts associated with Marcy Bradford and Connie Bradford. The freeze lasts 72 hours and will be extended based on fraud findings and signature verification. But with what you've provided, the odds are very good. So they can't pay for anything wedding related? Correct. No hotel, no flowers, no band, no cake. I felt no triumph, no vengeance, only quiet. Like every knock on the door, every desperate plea for help, every guilt-laced message from the past 10 years had finally fallen silent. That night, in my Boston apartment, soft lights on, laptop in my lap, I wrote, for the first time. Not for them, not to explain, not to defend. For me. I created a new account on a well-known family finance forum, where advisors, parents, and financial abuse survivors share real stories. I named the account The Invisible Daughter. The first line I wrote was, I used to think if I worked hard, never kept score, and showed up whenever my family needed me, someday they'd see I belonged. But to them, I was just the quiet check signer. I shared how I paid for my sister's tuition without saying a word, how I covered my stepmother's hospital bills and was never once asked, do you have enough? I wrote about the only house left from my late father, and how it was sold with a signature I never signed. I didn't write chronologically. I wrote in fragments, in pieces of memory, in that sting when someone asked, are you and your sister close? And I didn't know whether to nod or shake my head. At the end, I left one line. Not everyone in a wedding dress is a princess. Sometimes, they're just spending someone else's name. No real name, no photos, no email. I hit post and closed the laptop. The next morning, I got a message from Darian. Eliza, you're #1 trending, it's going viral. I opened my phone. Over 2,800 shares, more than 1,200 comments, each with its own story, but the same feeling. I've been used too. Thank you for speaking up. Family doesn't get to destroy you in the name of love. One comment stayed with me. We're not invisible. We've just learned silence as survival. But when we speak, we're terrifying, because truth is louder than money. I didn't reply to any comments, but I read every single one. Darian called around midnight. Are you okay? I smiled into the phone. I'm okay. But you know what's funny? What? They still haven't sent a single apology. Darian sighed. Because they still think you're just angry. That you'll send more money eventually. I replied quietly. They don't know. I already sent the documents to the hotel's legal team. And to the florist company. Darian chuckled softly. You don't need to strike hard, you just need to call things by their true name. 3 days after I sent the legal documents to the wedding vendors, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Not from my stepmother, not from Marcy, but from third parties. The ones who had smiled, shaken hands, signed contracts with them, and were now backing out in a panic. The first email came from Crystal Pines Lodge, the wedding venue. The tone was polite, but the content cut like a blade. We hereby cancel the contract due to invalid payment sources and emerging legal risks. The June 7th reservation has been removed from our calendar. The deposit will not be refunded. Then came the florist, the band, the lighting vendor, the videographer. Each gave a different reason, but they all stemmed from the same thing. Forged documents, fake signatures, and my name being misused. I didn't have to make a single call, didn't have to lift another finger. Just a series of clear emails with attached proof. They pulled out on their own, and Marcy's wedding began to collapse like a house of cards. Thursday night, I received a text from an unknown number. "Eliza, this is Gavin. Can we talk?" I looked at the name. Gavin Emerson, Marcy's fiancé. I called back, brief. "Yes?" His voice wasn't angry, just tired, like he'd walked through a hailstorm. "I just want to confirm a few things. If you're about to ask whether I ruined your wedding, the answer is no. I simply stopped them from spending money under my name." Gavin paused for a few seconds. "I know. I saw all the documents Darian sent." I raised an eyebrow. "You know Darian?" "He interned at my father's company back in 2014. When this all started unraveling, I reached out to him, and..." Gavin hesitated. "Marcy denied everything. Said it was a misunderstanding. Said you made it up out of jealousy, but your financial records don't lie." I leaned back in my chair. "What did she say about me? That you're lonely? No husband, no kids. That you like to control everything. That you sent money just to be thanked." I laughed, but there was no joy in it. "And who do you believe?" I thought I knew Marcy, but now I'm not sure she even believes herself anymore. I said nothing. For a brief moment, I heard something in Gavin's voice. Not anger, regret. "The engagement's been called off," he added. "My parents insisted. They don't want the Emerson name tied to a financial fraud scandal." I wasn't surprised. It felt like justice was moving on its own, without me needing to scream for it. The next morning, I received an email from someone named Lydia Grant, signed Journalist, The Financial Atlas. Subject line: Interview request, The Invisible Daughter's Story. I sat still for a while, then opened the email. "My name is Lydia Grant, and I specialize in reporting on financial abuse within families. Your piece, though anonymous, has reached thousands. I traced the Oregon court filing and discovered your real name. I understand this is a sensitive boundary, but if you're willing, I'd like to tell the story in full. With context. With consent. With truth." I thought about it for a long time. I didn't want my name in the press, but I also didn't want this story to end as an anonymous post. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I composed a separate message with all the original documents attached. The statements of money I had sent to my family. And her tuition receipts that I had paid. The credit card account opened under my name. The forged house sale document. And a handwritten letter from my father when I was 17, in which he wrote, "You don't need recognition. You need to know you're not wrong for loving." I sent the message without my full name, without agreeing to an interview, with only one sentence. I don't need to retell it, but if you plan to tell it for me, tell it right. That night, I read Lydia's article published on the Financial Atlas. She didn't name me, but she told everything, clearly, fully, without bitterness, without drama. Just a true story about a daughter financially exploited by the very people she once believed were her home. Comments kept pouring in. Not praise, but empathy, shared stories, apologies from strangers, standing in for the silence of family. I didn't reply to anyone. I simply sat by the window, watching the city of Boston fade into golden light. And I understood that truth, even without applause, was the only thing keeping me upright. Courtroom 4, Multnomah County Superior Court, Oregon. The sky was overcast that day, heavy gray clouds hanging as if they were carrying the weight I couldn't name. I stepped into the courtroom, my hand clutching the file Darian had prepared. He walked behind me, silent but steady, like a landmark in a desert. Across the aisle, Connie and Marcy were already seated. My stepmother wore a stiff beige overcoat, lifeless in posture. Marcy sat with her legs crossed, light makeup on her face, but the panic beneath her mascara was impossible to hide. The judge was a silver-haired woman in her 60s, wearing reading glasses and carrying a gaze sharp as a scalpel. She tapped the gavel lightly. This hearing is now in session. Case regarding signature forgery, identity theft, and property fraud. Plaintiff, Ms. Eliza Moran. The prosecutor laid out the case file. All documents. The fake power of attorney, transaction records, the credit card application were submitted as evidence. The judge frowned. Miss Marcy, according to records, you conducted a series of transactions on an account opened under your sister's name. Do you confirm this? Marcy turned to her attorney, then faced the judge again. Your Honor, my mother guided all of it. I didn't know it was illegal. She said my sister wouldn't mind. She's rich anyway. I looked up at her. Marcy avoided my eyes. For the first time, I saw a real crack in the confident shell she always wore. The judge turned her chair toward Connie. Miss Connie, do you have anything to say? Connie stood. She didn't look at me. She simply lowered her head, her hands trembling slightly. I didn't know it was that serious. At the time, I just thought we needed money for Marcy's wedding. The house was sitting empty, and Eliza lived in Boston. I didn't think she'd mind. And you thought forging a signature and opening a credit card under someone else's name was legal? Connie collapsed back into her seat, her eyes red. She whispered, almost to herself, I just didn't want to disappoint Marcy. I thought Eliza would understand. Darian looked at me, then stood. Your Honor, I'd like to speak. Go ahead, Miss Moran. I stepped forward, my hand gripping the edge of the witness stand, not to make a point, but to steady myself. I'm not here for revenge. I'm not interested in how many years someone might serve. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not a victim asking for comfort from justice. I took a breath, locking eyes with Marcy. I only want one thing. For the truth to be called by its real name. I turned toward Connie. I used to believe that if I gave enough, the family would realize love had value beyond money. But I was wrong. To them, I wasn't a daughter, wasn't a sister. I was a walking ATM. Silent, self-erasing, and better off invisible. The courtroom went utterly quiet. I didn't see tears, didn't hear sobs, but something shifted in the air. Like someone had torn down a curtain that had hung for too long. I continued, my voice slow and clear. They may call what they did a mistake, an oversight. We thought it was allowed, but I won't call it that. I'll call it what it truly was. Betrayal. I returned to my seat. Darian placed a quiet hand on my wrist. Wordless support. The judge nodded. She didn't offer sympathy, but in her gaze I saw a cold understanding, like someone who had witnessed far too many families break, not from lack of money, but from lack of boundaries. She tapped the gavel. The court will consider criminal charges if requested by the prosecution. On the civil side, there is sufficient basis to proceed. The next hearing will take place next week. I rose, gathered my files, and left the courtroom without looking at anyone. But as I passed the defense table, I heard Connie whisper, breath shaky, Eliza, if there's still any love left, could you drop the case? I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I only said, loud enough for her to hear, love isn't something you sign someone else's name onto your debts for. And I walked out of the courtroom, knowing, today, I didn't win. But I had named what they'd spent my whole life trying to bury. That day, Portland had a light rain, a quiet spring drizzle, just enough to dampen your shoulders, enough to make the old wooden awning of the house I once lived in with Dad echo with familiar ticking. I leaned against the doorway, holding a cup of hot tea, not thinking much. The court had issued its ruling that morning. My stepmother Connie received a 3-year suspended sentence. Marcy was sentenced to 400 hours of community service and ordered to repay all funds charged to the credit card in my name within 5 years. I didn't go to hear the sentencing. Darian told me I didn't need to, and I believed him. There are some things, once named, you don't need to watch fall. I thought that would be the end of it, but that afternoon, the doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even checked the screen. My stepmother, Connie, stood on the porch, clutching her purse, rain soaking into her coat, hair clinging in wet strands. Could I have a few minutes? I gave no reply, simply stepped aside, letting her stand beneath the awning. A breeze passed. The air smelled fresh, bittersweet. Connie pulled out a yellow envelope, the paper damp and warped. This is a letter your father once wrote. He sent it to me after you got into college. I kept it all this time. I thought, maybe you should read it. I took it, opened it in silence. Dad's handwriting was exactly as I remembered, neat, slightly slanted, a bit stern but gentle at the ends. Linda, if there comes a time when Eliza is angry, please don't blame her. She was born carrying more than her share. Don't abandon her if she seems cold. Don't assume she doesn't care when she's silent. She's someone who loves without knowing how to ask for anything in return. She's strong, but soft-hearted when it comes to family. If anything happens to me, don't let her be alone. They need her, but she needs them too. I folded the letter, stood still for a moment, then turned to Connie. Dad wrote this when he still believed they were a family worthy of my love. She said nothing, eyes swollen, lips trembling. I know I was wrong, I have no excuse, but I still want to say this. If I could go back, I would do things differently. I looked at her for a long time. No more anger, just a distance I couldn't name, like someone looking back at something once familiar after a fire. You don't need to say anything else. This letter, you brought it hoping I'd forgive you? No, I brought it because I thought you should know how much your father believed in you. Then you should also know I read it. But I don't need to keep it. I walked to the small metal burner by the porch, the one I used to burn scrap paper when working from home, placed the letter on the tray, lit a match. The flames flared. The paper turned to ash in under a minute. Connie glanced at me, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. I spoke slowly. I didn't abandon them. They abandoned me a long time ago. That wasn't an accusation. It was a truth, one that needed no defense, no agreement. It only needed to be said. I won't bother you again. She turned and stepped down the stairs. Rain was falling harder now. I watched her figure fade into the curtain of water. Part of me wanted to run after her, to hold her, to ask why it had to be this way. But that part was too tired to come back to life. I stepped back inside, closed the door. An airy stillness settled in, the kind that for the first time wasn't filled with misplaced hope. I left Boston on a quiet June morning. No announcement, no wave goodbye, just a suitcase, a box of books, and a roadmap pointing north. I settled in a small coastal town in Maine, a place where the town name is written on a crooked wooden sign, and the post office runs on 2 rotating clerks. I bought a 2-story wooden cabin, its back resting against pine woods and its face turned to the sea. Each morning, I opened the door to the sound of waves hitting rocky shores, and the scent of damp wood mixed with eucalyptus from the trees behind the house. No one here knows who I am, and I don't need them to. I spent the first month simply breathing deeply, breathing fully, tending the garden, buying rugs, hanging a small wooden sign by the door with 3 engraved lines. Quiet, sovereign, unobligated. It wasn't until the 6th week that I opened my laptop again. My inbox was full of messages, some from months ago, some just hours old. Messages from strangers, people who had read my story under the name The Invisible Daughter, or who had seen the version journalist Lydia Grant had published on the Financial Atlas. My sister. I'm still living in a house where everyone assumes my salary belongs to the whole family. I'm 67. Every month I have to hand over my retirement check to my son to keep for me, even though I raised him for more than 30 years. Thank you. You helped me name my pain. I read every line, took notes, sorted them into groups: finances, emotions, boundaries, manipulation, invisible debts. And then I realized I wasn't an exception. I was just one voice among thousands who had once been forced to stay silent in order to preserve a family. I kept writing, no longer under a pseudonym. I sent the draft of my second article to the editor at the Financial Atlas, titled, "When Sacrifice is Forgotten, It's Not Love, It's an Unspoken Transaction." The article went live in mid-August. Within 3 days, I was invited to speak at a webinar about finances and boundaries in family relationships. I agreed. The first session had only 23 participants. The next week, there were 84. 3 months later, over 600 people had signed up for my online workshop series called "I'm No One's Bank Anymore." Not everyone came because of money. Some came because they were emotionally suffocated. Some hadn't said no to their mother in 20 years. Some came just to hear someone say, "Family does not mean immunity from limits." I wasn't a therapist. I didn't give advice like an expert. I simply shared what I had lived. That there's a thin, invisible line between helping and being used. And once you cross that line for too long, you lose yourself. One Wednesday afternoon, I opened my traditional mailbox and found a letter. Thick, ivory-colored, postmarked from Missouri. Inside was a handwritten note, neatly inked in black. "My name is Karen W., age 52. Your story helped me realize that for the past 30 years, I haven't been living. I've existed like a shadow. I poured all my savings into supporting my brothers after our parents died. I gave up marriage because Mom needed me close. I used to think that was duty. But the truth is, I've never been treated like a person with worth of her own. I'm packing my things. For the first time in my life, I'm moving out of the town that's held me for half a lifetime, thank you for not staying silent." I set the letter on the table, my hands still slightly shaking, not from emotion, but because I knew I had just witnessed someone open the door to their life for the first time in decades. That night, I sat by the window, the firelight casting a warm glow on the page. I began writing my third piece. Forgiveness is a choice, but letting go is an action. And this time, I wasn't writing for me alone. I was writing for Karen. For the 84 people in the first workshop. For everyone who'd ever been turned into the default burden bearer simply because they were better at being quiet than everyone else. Autumn afternoons in Maine always carry a kind of quiet gentleness. The air wasn't cold yet, but cool enough for a thin sweater and a pot of ginger tea. I sat on the wooden porch, beside a small table with a jar of wildflowers I had picked that morning, watching the horizon where sea and sky blended in pale orange. The breeze whispered through the pine trees behind the house, flipping a few pages in the notebook I always carried. I once used it to track expenses, outline financial strategies for clients, later ideas for workshops. But now it held more than that. It held words I wrote when I had no one to talk to, questions no one had ever answered, moments I wondered if I was simply too cold, or if I had loved the wrong way for too long. I poured more tea and checked my phone for next week's schedule: a virtual workshop with a women's group in Denver, a call with Lydia Grant about the book manuscript. I was about to open my email when a new message, no subject, appeared at the top of my inbox. Sender, Marcy Bradford. I hesitated for a moment before clicking it open. The message was only one line long. "I'm sorry. For everything. I understand now." I read it again and again. Part of me waited for something more specific, clearer, or at least more sincere. But it was only that single, short sentence floating between hundreds of work emails, event invitations, and reader feedback. I didn't know what Marcy truly understood. That I wasn't a walking wallet? That pain doesn't fit neatly into 3 words. I'm sorry? That some actions can't be undone with a single click of send? Maybe she understood something. Maybe not. I set the phone on the table, swiped my finger lightly, and the email vanished from my inbox, as quietly as it had arrived. Down in the yard, a squirrel jumped onto the porch rail, grabbed a walnut shell, and darted off, swift as a shadow. I smiled. There are simple things in this world you only notice after letting go of so many things that were never yours to carry. I'm not their daughter anymore. Not a sister. Not the first name they call when a payment notice arrives. Not the silent one covering tuition, hospital bills, or wedding expenses. I'm simply Eliza, the woman who makes tea every morning, who teaches small workshops on weekends. Sometimes hikes the forest trail. Sometimes writes between wind gusts and seagull cries. And I don't need to be anything beyond that. Brave, exceptional, or the sister who always gives in. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. The voices had gone quiet, the spreadsheets were gone, the guilt-laced demands had finally faded. Only the sound of waves, the wind, and a kind of silence that no longer feels frightening. Because it doesn't mean loneliness anymore. It means freedom. What do you think of my choice? Does forgiveness always have to be spoken aloud? Or maybe, sometimes, simply letting go without looking back is its own way of closing old chapters and starting to live truthfully? I know every family is its own universe, full of unseen boundaries. Until they're crossed. My story isn't unique. Maybe, somewhere inside you, you've also faced the same decision. To keep playing the familiar role, or to step out and become who you truly are. If something in my journey resonated with you, even just for a moment, a single line, or that quiet, "I've felt this too," leave a comment below, because maybe your words are exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their way out. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, honest moments, sometimes painful, but always moving toward healing and freedom, click follow. We'll meet again in other stories, in the quiet corners of life, where the human heart still speaks. And there, I'll keep telling you what happens when people stop fearing loss and start truly living.